This video is a supplement for Project Management for Technology, Chapter 3, entitled The Charter. And I'm Dr. James Reneau from Shawnee State University, and I'll be taking you through this material. In this video, we will be covering what a project charter is, and it is the result of the planning phase of the project, and it will act as a guide for all of the rest of the project. It's kind of the main governing document. So we're going to spend this video talking about it. And then we're going to talk about something that happens as we move from planning, and that is called the kickoff meeting. And we'll talk about the kickoff meeting and actually making one of those successful. So the first area that a project charter needs to really hone in on and focus on are the goals and objectives of the project. The goals and objectives must be clear, absolutely clearly written. Every word in the objectives and goals need to be understood and there for a specific purpose. They also need to be measurable. Defining goals and objectives that there are no measures and no way to decide whether we got there or not, they're not very useful. You work with your sponsor to create this document. Your sponsor knows what their goals, what their objectives, and what their hopes and dreams are for this project. So this is really working very closely with the sponsor and with maybe a few potential customers to create this goals and objectives section of the project charter. It gives a clear understanding to absolutely everyone who's involved in the project about what we're doing and why we're doing it. It also needs to include very specific instructions like I want or we want this X, or we want this by this date, or this and we don't want this by this date and time. So it really needs to be very clear and specific, the goals and objectives of your project in the project charter. Another important part of your project charter is a description of the project, a descriptive section. The description should have all of the big key characteristics of the project and should provide enough detail to really move us into the planning phase where we can start creating our work breakdown structures and additional things, and you'll see those coming up in future videos. But we need a full description with all of the big key characteristics that are going to make this project successful or not. In addition to the goals, objectives, and description, there should be a bulleted list or a list somewhere of the key deliverables. What are the things we're going to deliver to the client during the project? Key deliverables. Now, some of these deliverables may be deliverables that happen throughout the project, but these are the deliverables, a list of measurable outcomes and specific items or products or actions to deliver throughout and at the end of the project. High-level requirements are also there, and you can think of requirements as characteristics of the deliverables. A requirement would be the glasses must be red, or something of that sort would be a characteristic of a deliverable, or specifications of the outcomes if it's not a physical product but a consulting or other kind of non-tangible product, a service of something of that sort. You need to get these right because as we move forward through planning, you'll take these deliverables and these high-level requirements and turn them into low-level requirements, into sub-deliverables. And you got to get these right at this point and fully understand the project before we can move on to start planning on how to make the project a success. A charter should also include a list of things called milestones. And a milestone is various points throughout the project where we can stop and take a breath, where we can stop and take a look, where we can stop and take some metrics and decide whether, yes, we're moving along, yes, we're getting this done, and yes, we're making forward and not backward progress. These are some of the big milestones. Imagine maybe you're building a house. Um, some of the milestones in the process of building a house would be, well, the ground has been cleared, or the foundation's been poured, or the walls have been framed, or the roof is on it. Well, that's a big milestone because as soon as it's not raining on your head, you can get a lot of interior stuff done. The exterior siding is on. Those are usually milestones in building a house. Think about milestones in developing a piece of software. Um, we understand we have our flow charts created. We have our hierarchy charts created. We know what our objects are going to be. We have an alpha copy that does certain features. We've then added additional certain features. So each of those would be milestones in a software development project. But you can see the milestones, think of them as points along a trip. If you're going from here to somewhere in your car, there are certain places along the way that are, oh, I'm halfway there. Yeah, I'm three-quarters of the way there. And those are always good to have those milestones listed in your project charter. Something else a project charter should have is a budget. Now, at this point, it's a really rough estimate. We don't know exactly how much this project is going to cost at this point because we've not gone through all of the details. We don't know exactly how many hours each of the things are going to take, or weeks or months it's going to take. We don't know exactly all of that, but we can make some good estimates here, some good rough estimates here. We'll get a better estimate as we move through planning and as we really identify how many staff we're going to need, how quick we're going to get things done, and those sorts of things. But the sponsor will need to make a decision at this point to move on to the next phase, because if at this point in the scope document in the project charter we've identified a budget that is just way too big, the sponsor is going to say, man, I can't do the budget, or I can't do the project, or he might say, or they might say, well, let's cut it up into multiple projects and get this one done first, and let's work on that one. So we do need a good, and again, I say good estimate, but it's going to be very rough and very speculative, and usually based upon previous projects and other examples of projects we've done. Another really important thing to do at this early part of a project is to identify what assumptions and constraints lay in the way of us being successful in the project. What assumptions have we made? And an assumption is what we believe to be true. What we believe to be true is an assumption. An assumption would be that the marketplace doesn't change, but the marketplace might. An assumption might be that the legal requirements won't change, but they might. An assumption might, there are all kinds of assumptions that we can bake into our project and bake into our charter. So to list some of these assumptions and things that possibly could change, but they're things we believe will be true. That um, I think I've listed a couple. So you can think of those. There are also constraints, and constraints are limitations that we know right now. Constraints. Money's a constraint, time's a constraint, technology's a constraint, management throughout the business is a constraint, competition from outside our business, but also competition from inside our business. Maybe operations could constrain us, maybe other projects and their requirements for employees could constrain us, legal constraints. So there are all kinds of constraints, and we need to spend time identifying those now. Now, remember, this is the charter. These need to be high level, but they need to be thorough, and we need to be honest with our assumptions, and we need to be honest with some of the constraints that may exist. We also, at this point, now that we've got assumptions and constraints and budgets and all of the things we've talked about, we also need to talk about what opportunities or threats. Remember, a risk is both positive or negative, unknown, um, things that might happen. Um, they're similar to constraints, but a constraint you can stop and think. A constraint is always there. For instance, you're driving to Florida, and you know that a constraint is the speed limit posted on the roads you've chosen to drive. Okay, so that's a constraint. It's a legal requirement. You can't get around it. Well, yeah, you can. You can take risks and drive faster. So you have the choice of taking the risk of getting caught and paying for a speeding ticket or staying within the constraint. See how they're different? Um, Constraints may include stock market. Risks may include the stock market, may include commodity prices. For instance, maybe your project relies on a rare earth material, gold or molybdenum or something else that you need, that always is changing in price every day. There are legal changes, management changes, competition changes, technology changes. There are all kinds of risks that we need to identify. Some of them may actually be beneficial to us. For instance, a technology change. One of the risks is that the price goes down on the tech hardware that we've decided to use. Another risk could be, though, that the manufacturer ceases manufacturing the hardware we've decided to use. So you can see that some of these are risks both to the positive and to the negative. The last part of a project charter are the approvals. After we've written the project charter, after we've identified all of the risks and everything that we've talked about in this presentation so far, we now have the criteria we now know what we're going to do and what we've got to deliver, and we should be able to tell when the project is actually going to end. We need to get formal approval to get it started. We need to get our sponsor to sign off on the document. Now, it can be an email saying go for it, but usually it's a very formal process. And the reason you want to make it formal is so that if things happen, sponsor gets wishy-washy, and there are all kinds of things that can happen. So a formal approval is really required here. And you might want some of the other stakeholders to be involved in the sign-off, but the sponsor for sure. And once we have that signature on the dotted line, once we have that formal approval, we have a green light to move into the planning phase. The day we move into planning is the day that we have our customary or our kickoff meeting. And a kickoff meeting is just a kind of, now that we have permission to move forward, let's let everybody know what we're doing. Sponsor, important stakeholders, team member, project management staff, and anyone in the community that's involved in this project needs to be involved in this kickoff meeting. It's to communicate the goals, the milestones, and to get everybody on board. And you won't get everybody on board if it's a big project, especially if it's a contentious project, but it's still good to get this all out. This is not a design meeting. We've not started designing yet, and we don't want to talk about design. We're going to do that in the planning phase, or a change meeting. We're not going to accept changes at this point. This is to get the project started. We'll refine the scope and we'll refine some of the design and we'll make some little changes as we go through the plan, as we go through our planning phase. But this is the big kickoff. I have approval. I have commitment of budget. And I know what the project is going to be. So let's have a kickoff meeting and get everybody on board. This video presentation goes along loosely, or actually closely, to Kim Heldman's CompTIA Project Plus Study Guide, Chapter 3, and the reference is there on the slide. We've reached the end of this presentation on the project charter. I'd like to say thank you for watching. I'm Dr. James Reneau, and this presentation is copyright 2020 by me. You can contact me at jreneau@shawnee.edu. Remember, this work is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Share Alike 4.0 International License. And again, thank you for watching.